when you're looking for a new job, you don't want to be thinking about what's the quickest thing I can get into just to start making some money because I'm out of work. And, not only does the emergency fund give you time to look for a job, but it gives you time to look for the right job.
So excited to have you here today. We've got a ton of fun topics to talk about, but the big question at hand is how much should I be saving? But before we break that down, maybe we can just start by defining the difference between short-term and long-term goals.
Yeah, and there are two really important things to consider. So for short-term goals, really think about the 1 to 3 year time frame. Mm-hmm. And for those things, it's a new car, maybe a down payment for a home, or an emergency fund.
Yep.
But for long-term goals, you're thinking beyond 3 years. And those are things that might take a little bit longer to save for, things further down the road. So thinking about things like retirement or education savings or potentially a second home. The key thing there is there's actually different types of accounts you'd want to use for short-term and long-term goals. So definitely keep that in mind as well.
Helpful to know. And that breakdown is just a really great way to look at both short-term and long-term. I'm have aspirations of buying a house one day. So that short-term kind of in the next 3 years would be awesome. So good to know that's kind of the category it fits in. For someone who's just starting out, so I think about myself a couple years ago, right out of college, what is a first step they should take?
Yeah, so back to one of the short-term goals I mentioned, an emergency fund. It's a great place to start, and it's one of the first things that people getting started should really think about. And to get started, about $2,000 is a great place to start, or about half a month's household expenses, whichever is greater. And then secondly, once you've gotten that kind of basic emergency fund set up, switching to one that is about 3 to 6 months of household expenses. Mm-hmm. And that is really for what we call like income shocks.
Income shocks. Maybe we can elaborate a little bit on that. What is an income shock and how should we react to it? Are there any other shocks out there that we should be thinking about as savers? Can you elaborate a little more on that?
Yeah, so the emergency fund truly is for the unexpected. So it is for these shocks. And so for an income shock, so that 3 to 6 month of household expenses, you're really thinking that is being used for, you may lose a job, right? You may get your hours cut at work, and that's stressful enough. But not having that financial safety net to kind of weather the storm until you can get your hours back or find a new employment opportunity is even more stressful. And so by having that financial safety net, 3 to 6 months of household expenses, it really helps you weather the storm through those times.
I think about the income shock. My little brother recently lost his job, got a new one pretty quickly after, but that couple of weeks for him was stressful enough, right? He was worried. And he had that kind of emergency savings built up. And so he knew he'd be okay for that time frame, allowed him to really pour himself into interviews and talking to new people to start a new role. And so definitely cool to hear about that income shock piece and how having an emergency fund can really prepare you for it.
Yeah, and I think it's a really good point you made too, because when you're looking for a new job, you don't want to be thinking about what's the quickest thing I can get into just to start so I can start making some money because I'm out of work. And not only does the emergency fund give you time to look for a job, but it gives you time to look for the right job.
Totally.
And you don't have to worry about money because you do have that buffer saved up, and that's what it's there for.
Any other shocks we should look out for?
Yeah, so back to what we call like a spending shock. And so spending shock is that $2,000 or the half month's living expenses, whichever is greater. And that is really for those unexpected life events, right? So think about a medical bill or your car breaking down and you need to have a quick infuse of cash to make a payment. And so having that money set aside can help for some of those things. Recently we had a dishwasher issue.
Oh, the worst.
It was unexpected. And next thing you know, there's a couple $1,000 bill for a new dishwasher. And by having an emergency fund, something that can help cover spending shocks is nice to have, right? Because you don't need to worry about how to cover that expense. You don't need to worry about going into debt. You can just make that payment and move on.
It's like one of those things, I think about this with car repair. It's like, an oil change, you can't see it, but you have to spend on it.
Exactly.
And there's no way to avoid it. All right. A lot of great helpful tips and tricks we learned about. Maybe we put it into kind of some actionable steps through some financial forecasting. I'm going to give you 3 scenarios. We can talk a little bit about what we would do in that scenario, what you'd suggest. How does that sound?
Sounds great.
All right. Scenario 1, monthly income, $3,000, no emergency fund saved. Your expenses total $2,500 between a mix of rent, utilities, groceries, transportation. And surprise, your car needs a major repair and it'll cost $1,000. What should you do? What should you think about?
Ouch. But it's a very common scenario, and it's the exact reason why you need an emergency fund. And so in this scenario, right, the amount of money that is coming in every month versus the expenses, what's left over isn't enough to pay for that. And so it really just shows being purposeful and being proactive and planning can really help when these scenarios arise. But if you are in this scenario, I think it's whatever money you have left, try to pay as much as you can off. Maybe even work with your car repair shop on a payment plan. As a last resort, you may have to go into debt in this situation, whether it's a credit card payment of sorts, and really focusing on paying that off as quick as possible would be the goal there. But really use it as a learning opportunity.
Yep.
Because coming out of this, you don't want this to happen again, and you want to be prepared for the next one because there will be a next one.
Totally.
So by even just saving $50, $100 a month and putting that aside regularly, that can help build up that fund so that when the next event happens, you're a little bit more prepared.
And just starting small helps, even if it feels like such a minimal amount each week. Doing that builds over time, helps you in a scenario like this. All right, let's do scenario 2. Okay. Monthly income, $3,000. Emergency fund of $3,000. Expenses for the month are $2,500. Again, a mix of rent, utilities, groceries, and transportation. The wrench in the scenario is you suddenly fall ill and need to visit the emergency room. The total cost of the visit and treatment is $1,200. What should you do?
Well, you have an emergency fund, so congratulations. You planned and you were proactive, and that's exactly what this is for. And so I would use that emergency fund and I would pay off that bill immediately in full. Right? Don't be tempted to go use your credit card or go into debt or dip into other types of accounts like retirement, savings accounts. This is exactly what your emergency fund is for. And so use it for this purpose and then start building it back up, right? And so by continuing to practice those habits, building that emergency fund back up to the 3,000 or whatever limit that you need is really important. But this is a great example of why having one is so beneficial.
And just that kind of ease of the feeling of having one when you're going through something like a medical expense, going to the emergency room, that's already stressful enough. And so to be able to have that can probably help you deal with some of the bigger things that are happening in this emergency.
Yep.
All right, last scenario. Monthly income, $3,000. Total monthly expenses are $2,500, mix of rent, utilities, groceries, transportation. And you receive an unexpected inheritance of $5,000 from a distant relative. What should you do?
That's great. That is a great situation to be in. And I would say take a beat, right? You're getting a large influx of cash, and putting a plan together for what you want to do with that cash is really important before you take any action or spend any money. I know it'll be very tempting to go out and buy the newest phone or a new watch or something for yourself, but that temptation to spend is something that you're going to have to fight against. Yeah. So first I would take a beat and I would say, okay, if I don't have an emergency fund, let me take a chunk out, right? So that $5,000, let me take a $2,000 out. Let me start an emergency fund. It's a great way to boost that start to an emergency fund that you can continue to grow on. The remainder, I think you can look for other savings opportunities, right? So have you started a retirement account yet? If you have children that need to go to college someday, have you started a 529 account? And really looking for some of those investment opportunities with some of that extra money to kickstart some of that. But then at the end of the day, some of that money is for fun, right? So, take $500, $600 or so maybe, and treat yourself, treat your family to a trip or something new or fun to do because, while planning is good and being prepared for the unexpected is great, people work hard for their money. And so using it to have fun is also important too.
We've talked a lot about the importance of emergency funds, having emergency savings for unexpected things that happen in your life. Maybe we can talk a little bit about other assets too. Do you see any benefits to having your savings and investments in one place next to each other?
I do. Yeah, I think it's actually good practice. I personally like it for a couple different reasons. One, I think it's just easier to manage, right? You have your savings and investing kind of at one institution, right? You can kind of see your holistic financial picture together, whether it's on your statements or on your tax returns. It's just a little bit easier to manage than things being spread out. So I think you can make more informed decisions and just reduce a little complexity in your life by having them at one place. And, the nice thing about Vanguard is offering like the Cash Plus account, which I'm a proud owner of.
Me too.
And, it allows you to save at a place that has other investment tools and advice to maximize not just your short-term goals, but your long-term goals as well. So things like retirement and education
You ever
savings.
want to kind of take that next step?
You got it. Yeah. And there is a, thing of saving too much cash, right? And so once you meet those savings goals, you're at a place like Vanguard where you can dive into so many other different types of options for different goals and different purposes.
It's interesting. I think about the amount of apps we open every day. What if there was one that had all of our financial picture, or at least our savings and our investments that we could see and take a peek at? All right, let's maybe bring it back to savings. We want to think about, maintaining discipline and not treating our savings as just kind of a piggy bank for everyday things. We talked about trips or going to the mall or buying a new phone. How do we maintain discipline around our savings to make sure that we are keeping it where it needs to be for the right time for that emergency fund or for other things for short and long-term savings, while also having everyday expenses?
Yeah, I think first and foremost is set a clear plan, right? Set a vision for what you're saving for. If you don't have an intention, you're less likely to save.
Yeah.
And so if you know the exact amount you need for an emergency fund or the exact amount you need for a down payment on a home, or if you want to do some renovations or go on a vacation, right? Set goals, set targets, and set a plan to get there. You're more likely to follow through on those. And then secondly, try to automate it, right? Set it and forget it. And by setting up recurring deposits or direct deposit, learning to live without that money, it will make a difference over time, and you will learn to live without it.
Pay yourself first. That's
exactly.
what they say.
Continually look at your expenses. Like, where can you cut back, right? There are necessary expenses, but there are a lot of unnecessary expenses that folks can cut back on. You mentioned all the apps we have. There's a lot of subscriptions out there. And so just looking and being rigorous and cutting back on some of those expenses is really important. And then using that money to automate it back into a savings vehicle. And then lastly is just continuing to reviewing that plan regularly. So things change, life events happen, milestones occur where you need to deplete those savings to kind of use what they were intended for. So continue to reset those goals, continuing to reset those targets, and continue to reassess your financial picture is important.
I like the idea of coming back to it either monthly, quarterly, every year, and just having kind of that appointment on your own calendar to check on my savings. How are they doing? What do I need to change? What do I need to pivot? We talked a little bit about it, but how can we connect these financial concepts, so saving, emergency funds, into some of our everyday passions? I love going out to eat. I love going on new trips, exploring new places. How can I think about saving and doing those things in tandem?
So if you think about the different types of goals you're saving for, right? We talked about, hey, first thing you should do is set up that emergency fund. Well, once you've achieved that emergency fund, think about the other goals you have in your life and the things that you want to do, right? Traveling is a really good one. When you feel comfortable and you have all your emergency savings, set a new goal, right? I want to go to Italy, right? And I want to go there next year. And how much is it going to cost? And how much do I need to save from now until then to get there? And so applying that to a very clear goal, a very clear intention, can actually help you have fun. And what I think is really nice about it is for a lot of these expenses, when you spend the money and when you take the trip, you're paid in full. Right? You're not sitting there worrying about, how am I going to pay off this trip? Or
so you enjoy it.
A month or two down the road, you had a great trip, but now you're looking at an enormous credit card bill. And by just having that plan, being a little bit patient too, and being rigorous in making those savings goals a reality is invaluable to do what you want to do and enjoy it to the fullest.
It makes that trip worth it. if you're patient, but you get there, I mean, picture myself in Italy. Pizza is my favorite food. I would love nothing more than to go there and know that it was well worth the practice and the savings.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being here. So great to have you. So many amazing tips and points for everyone to get better and smarter at savings and to learn how to save and how much they should save. Really appreciate your time today, Brandon.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you to everyone for tuning in. Join us next time for more actionable financial tips and strategies. Until then, stay savvy, savers.